Hey, as long as we're talking about that Sony thing, let's venture into a topic only semi-gaming related. Anonymous. Specifically, their involvement in the PSN fiasco and the follow-up Sony attacks. Now, Sony's laid the blame on their shoulders, and it's fairly likely that any formal government inquiry will as well. But should we accept that at face value? Because I'm not so sure. In order to weigh the evidence in any meaningful manner, we're going to have to do a little bit of trying to pin down what Anonymous is, because otherwise, this happens. Anonymous threatened us without Sony. Anonymous has no leadership. No one can make statements for Anonymous. Your perceived threat is invalid. Anonymous is anyone. Well, then we got a note from the hackers saying it was Anonymous. And if Anonymous is anyone, then technically Anonymous did it. That's just what the criminals would do to throw the blame on Anonymous. Well, even if they are just trying to use Anonymous as a scapegoat so Sony doesn't track them down, by your logic, if the criminals say they're part of Anonymous, a disorganized group that anyone can be a part of, then technically those criminals are still part of Anonymous. That's a little confusing, and I can't do voices. Alright, enough of that. Anyway, we can all see the fallacy in this argument. You might as well blame elves, Hillary Clinton's secret cabal, or the international anarcho-syndicalist movement. It could have been a Sony inside job, and it would, by this definition, still be just as valid to say Anonymous did it. But this definition of Anonymous has never made any sense. Yes, Anonymous can be anyone. Yes, they have no leadership. Yes, they act on a broad range of issues, sometimes seeming to be pulled in opposite directions. But there are a lot of movements that could be said about. Take the punk movement, or if you prefer your antiquated movements, the romantic movement. To be a punk or a romantic, all you have to do is say you are. There are no qualifications for joining, and there's no leadership you have to follow. But not many people are going to believe you're punk if your favorite source of information is Fox News and you throw fits when people raise taxes on the ultra-rich. Why? Because even though movements like these have no leadership and no entrance requirements, they do have ideals. And that's true of Anonymous. In fact, I'd argue that's what makes Anonymous Anonymous. Here's my understanding. 1. Anonymous stands for the freedom of information. 2. Anonymous stands for free speech. 3. Anonymous stands for an unregulated internet. 4. Anonymous generally only stages organized attacks on groups that attack them directly or infringe on their core ideals. 5. Anonymous does not engage in criminal activity for the financial benefit of members of its community. And finally, number 6. Anonymous believes in mischief for the lulz. Anonymous's initial dispute with Sony was over Sony's treatment of GeoHot for cracking the PS3. This falls firmly into the internet freedom of information side of what Anonymous is. But the actual attacks on PSN make no sense in this context. First, Anonymous doesn't steal credit cards. Anonymous may be many things, but I wouldn't say thieves is one of them. If Anonymous wanted to marshal its resources to engage in credit card theft or fraud, God help us all. And let me tell you, if credit card theft was their ultimate goal, Sony probably isn't where they would start. Second, and this one's debatable, but taking down PSN sort of seems to me to be, anti-lulz. Sure, it's funny for a day or two, maybe a week, but to cause this sort of catastrophic failure alienates not only the very sort of people they want to appeal to, but also the very people that many of them are. Taking down a game network for weeks doesn't really make the world more entertaining. It doesn't add levity to a dour society plagued by seriousness. It just means people can't play their games for a while. And I bet you there are a fair amount of Anons who are stung by this attack. I mean, you gotta figure plenty of them are gamers. If the attack was carried out by Anonymous, my guess is that they'd have found a funnier, if crasser, way to mess with Sony. Lastly, the Anonymous calling card left in the system just seems a bit too obvious and bland for them. Now, it may just be my conspiranoia talking, but what better way to cover your ass if you're Sony than to say, hey, we found a file saying Anonymous did it. It's a story any government inquiry will believe, because Anonymous has earned itself no love in the marble halls of Washington, and it's pretty much an impossible thing to disprove. Now, many of you may remember that Sony at first said that it wasn't Anonymous, a statement reiterated by Anonymous through the same channels that the threats to Sony were made. So, if you accept the threat as speaking for Anonymous, you kinda have to at least consider the validity of the denial. But soon it became evident that this wasn't just a minor hiccup. The cost of this outage was going to be tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, between having to pay government fees, totally revamping the network, remunerating their audience for a month or more of lost time, and then suddenly a file claiming the attack was by Anonymous was found. It could very well be a fortuitous coincidence, but the timing certainly is odd. Alternatively, as mentioned earlier, if I was a cybercriminal, you'd bet I'd leave an Anonymous calling card for everything I did. Between their mysterious nature and their reputation for mischief, they're one of the easiest scapegoats ever. I'm afraid this is the sort of thing that could actually be the downfall of Anonymous. Not a nefarious government scheme to conduct false flag operations against them, just simple thieves using them as a patsy. So no, personally I don't think Anonymous did it. But I do think this will be a pivotal moment for Anonymous as a movement. Love them or hate them, you have to admit Anonymous has the power to do great things. In fact, they may be the only group out there that can effectively expose many of the frauds and hypocrisies of this modern world. But they may well get torn apart by this crisis. Denying that they hacked Sony means accepting that they stand for something, and this in turn means accepting that not just anyone can be Anonymous simply because they claim to be. Anonymous may well tear itself apart in a fight over whether or not having ideals violates their ideals. Anyway, that's my take on it. The fate of Anonymous and the real facts behind the Sony case, like many truths, will come to light in time. Thanks for indulging us in this slight deviation from our regular subject matter. We'll be back to talking about games next time. Thanks for watching, see you next week.